was live on my Twitch stream one day, playing the latest expansion of EverQuest called the Burning Lands, when a new viewer to my channel asked why I was playing the modern EverQuest content, rather than the newest time lock progression server, or P99. For clarification, for those unfamiliar what a time lock progression server is, I'll dive into what that is, and why this question comes up in my Twitch streams so often. You see, the EverQuest community as a whole is generally divided into 3 groups, and while someone may be part of more than one of these groups, nevertheless, these 3 main groups exist. That being players like myself that play on official live servers, as they're called, that provide access to all of the current 25 expansions of EverQuest. Then there are players that play on the official time lock progression servers, which are servers that launch brand new every few years with no content other than the original game, and then over time release expansion content in chronological order. And finally, the third group of players are those that play on unofficial emulation servers, which can be very much like the normal version of EverQuest, or may have custom content and rule sets, with arguably the most popular of these types of servers being the Project 1999 Blue server, which attempts to emulate to the highest degree possible a classic or vanilla EverQuest environment up to the second expansion of the game. These player groups within the EverQuest community are not unlike, say, groups of sports fans. For example, a community of American football fans. While the community as a whole loves football, there are different groups within it. Some may love the Dallas Cowboys, while others may love the Green Bay Packers, for instance. So when I say I play EverQuest, the immediate question is always, what version do you play? And the answer may turn off someone, much like telling a Cowboys fan that you like the Packers. Now, the answer to why I prefer the current expansions of EverQuest is simple. I've done the old content before, and I like exploring the new content, as well as playing the game with the quality of life improvements that have come along the way in EverQuest's evolution from the late 90s to today in 2019. I also enjoy the more in-depth and complex, always fighting active style of play that modern EverQuest boasts, as compared to the leisure style of play that EverQuest provided in the past. Don't get me wrong, the leisure, long downtime style of play was great back when 56K modems were the rage and voice communication was rare and non-existent. You needed the downtime to be able to converse and socialize with your friends, your group, or your guildmates. But I'd argue with the advent of voice communications, that necessity has been eliminated. I can now converse and socialize while fighting with no downside to my performance in game. Now, that isn't to say I don't have a downside in performance in my game when I'm streaming on Twitch. That's a different thing. Okay, let's just. Anyway, it eliminates any need for long stretches of time to pass between pulls.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
That's right, it's my opinion in my YouTube video. That said, this video is specifically targeting the modern version of the game, and I don't believe I will, but if I do mention a different version, please remember that this is the focus of this review. Modern EverQuest, as it is today, live servers, as they're called. Players that favor another version, be it the TLPs or emulated servers, may have positive things to say about their preferred version, and all of what they say may be true, but for me, the very best part about EverQuest today is that it's still evolving, still expanding, and the story continues because I love EverQuest. And when I say I love EverQuest, I don't mean I just love where EverQuest started. I mean I love where it stands today. Through all its trials and tribulations, it was not a perfect game when it was created, and I'm more than content to admit it's not a perfect game today. But I've constantly looked for the perfect game, and you know what? I've never found it. I've played almost every MMORPG out there, but I've yet to find a perfect one. But you know what EverQuest is? A damn good one. There's a reason I keep finding myself coming back to EverQuest after the next big game ends up disappointing me. It's not because EverQuest was my first MMORPG, because it wasn't. That was Ultima Online. No, EverQuest is the game I keep going back to because it's the best one I've ever played. I left EverQuest when Anarchy Online came out, and well, blah, yuck, I was quickly back in the EverQuest world called Norath. Then Dark Age Camelot came out, but despite the wealth of lore where Dayak could have used from Vikings to Arthurian legend to Celtic Hibernia, it felt so lacking in real depth and lore. Not that I didn't love the class designs, but eventually I got bored and came back to EverQuest, whose world was just so much more immersive and rich. And the list of then continues with then Final Fantasy XI, then EVE Online, then Lineage 2, then Shadowbane, then Star Wars Galaxies, then EverQuest 2, then World of Warcraft, then City of Heroes, then goes on and on and on and on. But each time, I returned to EverQuest, because when you actually get into modern EverQuest and start understanding the classes, the story, and its systems, you'll start to realize that the changes made and what has been added has only added to the game's great existence. With that exception, EverQuest is one of the most in-depth, sometimes brutal, but also beautiful games I've ever played because of the freedom that it gives players and how it allows you to fight and explore the world. It allows you to do what you want to do in one of the largest, if not the largest game worlds ever created. Honestly, it's so vast, it's easy to get overwhelmed with where to go or what to do, but that's where its brilliance lies, because it's up to you to explore this world and set the goals you wish to accomplish. That's not to say there aren't systems I wish were in EverQuest that you may find in more modern games, such as, for one example, a voiceover system for all the pages and pages of role-playing text that appear in the game. And this is where I have to face reality. That EverQuest is a two-decade-old game, and while content and improvements have been made, it will never draw the profits or population that other MMOs like World of Warcraft can. Granted, even World of Warcraft does not have full voiceover support, even though more and more content has been added with voiceover lines. And we're
Oh, how I loathe interruptions! What is your business here, mainlander?
And where some games like Elder Scrolls Online, Guild Wars 2, or Black Desert Online are stunningly beautiful games visually, I absolutely wish EverQuest had a graphics engine that could match them. However, I can say none of them deliver the same depth and D&D or RPG-like elements that EverQuest does. I mean, you can see the D&D roots right from the creation of your character, where you can choose where to allocate a certain number of stats, which were very important to how your character plays early on, just like in D&D. Now, I can admit that they got away from character creation stats mattering at a certain level in EverQuest when stats started to get all capped. But how you allocate your stats now, once again, matters in the Type 5 augment system, which allows you to greatly customize your heroic stat, depending on what augments you slot into your gear. But in returning to the features that the game lacks, it is despite these wishes that I'm amazed by EverQuest to this day, where studios much larger and with so much larger budgets can put out so little content as compared to EverQuest with its current development staff of, and I quote, 4.5 artists, 5.3 designers, and 5.7 programmers. There's only so much that is humanly possible for EverQuest development team to produce, yet they still manage to release a new expansion every year, while adding new features throughout the year. I mean, for context, in a recent interview, Ian, WoW's game director, confirmed the WoW dev team is made of 300 people.
There's one thing that I could stress to the community. It's that, God, do we care? Like, we care deeply about this. Everyone on the team, 300 people on the team.
That is 20 times the staff working on WoW than EverQuest. But have you played WoW recently? Do you feel like you're getting 20 times as much content as EverQuest likely is? EverQuest gets 8 new zones and 8 new raid events in each new expansion, give or take, per year. Does WoW get about 160 new zones and 160 new raid events per year? By my count, they haven't. There are, 8 events in Old War and 9 in the Battle of Dazar'alor and 8 world bosses. Far cry from what they should be able to produce. I mean, EverQuest even has player housing, which many but not all MMOs have. Yet a lot are not to the degree that you can customize your housing creation in EverQuest, where you can build a monument to the glory of the Ixar race like my home here. Or whatever these are. I guess my overall point is EverQuest may only appeal to a certain type of player, but if you're that type of player, and if you've never never played it before, or if you have not played it in many years, EverQuest is almost certain to surprise and delight you. I've tried to find a review that has done modern EverQuest justice for either its good or bad qualities, one that reflects how far this game has come over the last 20 years, and really explained what it felt like to play it today in its modern state, rather than reviewing a time-locked progression server or P99, both of which are a reflection of the game of old. But I couldn't find one, besides my amateur attempt at a review in 2017. So here I am today, hoping to fill that gap. With 2 expansions released, and so many more systems and improvements added over the 2 years since I made that video, and unlike that State of the Game review, my main focus is to explain to someone that may not have ever played EverQuest what it is, how it plays, and how it feels to play the game today. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you my review of EverQuest in 2019. Close to 20 years ago, at the age of 15, I picked up a box copy of EverQuest from my local EB Games. It's funny to think, in my life, I've spent more years playing EverQuest than not. At that time in 1999, however, I was playing Ultima Online, which was my first MMORPG, but I never played. It was great for its time, but limited in graphic capabilities and dimensions. However, when I heard there was a new MMORPG that was 3D, I had to give it a shot. For the first time, I could actually look around in my fantasy world in a first-person perspective, placing me in the literal shoes of my character. It was amazing. It was the first time I actually felt like I was really role-playing in a living, breathing role-playing game. As I looked through the eyes of my character, EverQuest at that time was little more than a viewport into the world, with a UI at the time taking a comical 50% of the screen, and even more if you had additional interface screens open, such as your inventory or spellbook, with no option for customization in any degree. I bring up this callback in nostalgia because if you haven't played EverQuest in recent years, you may only remember this UI or heard only about it. These days, the game couldn't be more different. For starters, the UI is so customizable that you can actually get overwhelmed. Here's a time lapse of how a default UI is set as you log into a new character, and how I like to set mine up. Now, I'll be the first to admit that the EverQuest UI can in no way be described as beautiful or pretty. Aesthetically, it's rather bland. With that said, it is very functional, and player-made UIs are supported, should you choose to look for one or make one yourself, if you understand XML, which I don't. It is interesting to me as I review EverQuest in the modern market today, that many modern MMORPGs, and even some that are older but have deeper pockets like World of Warcraft, do not offer the kind of native control to customize their UI that EverQuest does for its UI. In many games, you can't really move the UI around at all, or at least not without a third-party add-on such as the Move Anything add-on for World of Warcraft. Granted, I'm not saying that there are no other MMORPGs that have custom UIs. For instance, Star Wars The Old Republic added a very customizable UI with their 1.2 patch. Just that it's amazing how many games don't offer this type of feature. Now, there are a few features I can think of that would make the EverQuest UI better, such as a tabs feature for the chat windows. Even Dark Age of Camelot, another relic from the past, had this type of chat function. Or maybe a few different border themes to spruce up the appearance. But I can't help but mention how, even now, changes and new features are being added monthly by such a small team of developers that still have to produce other content like a new expansion every year. Despite what some may have you believe, EverQuest is still very far from being in a maintenance mode. For example, since my last review 2 years ago, the following has been updated or added to just the interface alone. But of course, none of this information helps you if you don't understand the basics of EverQuest. So let's stop talking about the UI for now and spend some time understanding what sort of game EverQuest is, so you'll know whether or not it's a game for you. The answer to this question is one I don't think you can find in other reviews from big name sites like IGN, Polygon, or Kotaku, because it's not an answer you'll uncover in only a few hours of play. EverQuest has so much content, so much depth, that it's hard to scratch the surface. surface from just a few hours of play in a low-level area? Now, I'm going to answer that question. However, it's going to take a lot of detail, so let's break it down. I can say that likely, if you're the type of player or person that doesn't have the time to look into this deeper, and you just want an immediate answer to that question, then here it is. EverQuest is not likely for you. However, I say that because immediacy is not something EverQuest will deliver. If you're a player that legitimately enjoys theme park MMOs, which focus solely on a very specific progression path from leveling to dungeons to raids, and then the only reason you play is to get your dailies done, then EverQuest is not going to be for you. But if you are a player that's bored of the modern style of games that seem to all emulate the big boy on the block, then you know what? EverQuest may be for you. Let's find out. Firstly, as you may have heard, EverQuest is an MMORPG, which stands for Massively Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Game. And at its roots, it actually holds true to the end of that statement. It is a true role-playing game in several senses. You see, EverQuest holds true to its D&D mud roots that the creators of the game used to play. I would argue that it's more of a role-playing game than most any other MMORPG out there. You can play it in first-person or third-person mode, whichever you prefer. For about 99% of the content in the game, you won't be punished for not using third person, even though having some spatial awareness of your surroundings will obviously be a benefit for certain classes. So how is it like RPGs of old? To start with, EverQuest doesn't hold your hand in its world. Take questing, for instance. You won't find giant indicators above the NPC's name showing you who to talk to. No, in fact, you don't know there is a quest to be granted for the most part until you actually talk to the NPCs. Some, of course, may be obvious. For example, talking to a lord of a city likely will find you a job or two that needs doing, but you'll never know who you'll run into that could use your help. Although some of the more current content in the game does give NPCs a title heading, it does help indicate they will provide a mission to adventurers, but that is not true for every NPC that provides a quest. For example, Grieving Soulsent here gives a personal task and a group mission needed for progression in the newest expansion of the Burning Lands. He clearly has a title below his name. Were I to pay attention to that, it indicates he has some quests. EverQuest does, of course, have fan sites that you can use to resource information should you get stuck. As with most RPGs, you will need to choose a class for your character. The class you choose is unchangeable for that character, but there are many classes that are more flexible than you'd think, with others being very core to specific roles like tanking, healing, damage, and support. So whichever type of role you like to play, there are a few choices for each, with some adaptive classes thrown in. For example, you can choose to be a warrior, which is a frontline tank, with a bunch of defense and aggro bells and whistles that lend them to be the primary person called on when a raid boss needs something to whack on. However, in a more casual environment, the pet that a beast lord uses can generally tank group content, allowing a class that deals decent damage to fill such a role as needed. Yes, they wouldn't make the best fit, but you can get by with this example. I could spend hours going over the different nuances of every class, and if you're interested in EverQuest, I'd suggest investigating them in more detail before choosing what main you want to play. Suffice to say, there are 16 of them, all of which have their own thing that makes them unique. And over the years, the classes have continued to grow and expand, their toolkits ever increasing to an overwhelming degree. And I believe that's so cool. I think the YouTuber SkillUp said it best in his review of Warframe when he said the following.
Gamers aren't idiots. We don't need our hands held all of the time. Complexity and depth should be embraced, not feared.
As a new player, you will constantly be learning new things your class can do. However, if you prefer a simple class design and rather play a game that seems to take away abilities to reduce complexity, where rotations and classes continue to be dumbed down, and systems continue to be added to take out the social aspect of the game, where you just log in, queue up for a 15-minute dungeon, barely speaking to the randoms in your group, as you mash through the linear dungeon, not having to worry about how many mobs you pulled, because each pack is so perfectly designed for a balanced group to take, with no need for coordination or crowd control, outside of some high-level Mythic Plus that only 5% of the player base will hit, then EverQuest is probably not for you, and you would be better off playing a game such as World of Warcraft. Speaking of groups, EverQuest at its core is a heavily group-focused game. While there is potential to be able to solo a lot of the content for some classes, the game is definitely designed for at least 80% of its content to be completed in a group. It is in this point I highly recommend choosing a server carefully, as at the time of this recording, there are servers that you will find grouping plentiful, and others that are a shell of their former glory. That is not to say the community of the lower populated servers are bad, just in a game where grouping is so heavy, your time is best served on a server that has a larger population. Until such time the EverQuest developers merge some of the lower populated servers together, which has not occurred for 9 years, despite the growing need for it to occur. As far as labeling EverQuest, I don't believe one specific label is really accurate. EverQuest has sandbox-like elements, but it's not strictly a sandbox game. In more recent years, there are definite progression paths and quests and achievement types, but it's not necessarily a theme park ride where you get on and just ride to the end. And while for the most part 90% of EverQuest is an open world, they have introduced instancing for raids and certain missions, so it's not 100% a pure open world. Instead, it's a mixture of all of these elements to form, well, EverQuest. Here's what my typical weekend play session looks like. I start out the day looking for some experience to grind out some AA points since my character is at max level. If my character was not max level, say I was working on an alt, I'd spend it the same way, just looking for experience for my level instead of investing the experience into the AA points. What are AA points? I'll get to that a little bit later in the review. For now, let's just say that it's a type of progression that you normally do after hitting max level. If you've played Elder Scrolls Online, for instance, think of them as champion points. Or if you've played Rift, they're like plain old attunement. But again, I'll get into more detail later. Anyway, normally I get a group with some guildmates, maybe a friend from outside the guild, or as a last resort, I may even try to form a pickup group. And I travel with them to one of my favorite camps to start getting XP. We kill a named or two while in the camp, which may or may not lead me to getting crafting materials that I can use to create gear upgrades, or even complete items that may also drop. That could be an upgrade for my alt or even myself, or I might get an AUG that is better than some of my old ones. And of course, I get experience for the aforementioned levels or AA. While grinding out our camp, a guildmate calls out needing a group for a progression mission. Having gotten a good amount of AAs, I answer the call, as does a few members of my group. We do the mission, and a few of us didn't have the progression mission done either, so we get credit for it, bringing them one step closer to unlocking a higher tier zone or some achievement reward. Additionally, this particular mission can drop what we call chase loot. There are 4 particular pieces that can drop from the last 4 NPCs in this mission. Each of those items can evolve into better gear, but you have to give up a portion of your own experience gain to evolve them. Additionally, these particular pieces of gear are interesting as you also have to have completed various achievements in order to advance the item to their evolution. For example, these boots require you to run around and explore every zone in EverQuest. But once you've put in the hard work of leveling them up and obtaining the needed achievements, they become the best in slot items in the game at this point in time. Anyway, then I take some time after the mission to browse the bazaar, and I look over my alts to see if any of the loot I obtained was an upgrade. Lastly, some newer members in the guild are out leveling, so I decided to help them out, so they gain some XP a bit faster. At the max level of 110, I can help anyone that are at least level 80 gain a good bit of EXP on mobs that are trivial to my level, as long as the NPCs are in a good level range for the lower level group members. They gain several levels in an hour, and I decided that was a good boost. And now it is raid time, so I join in on my guild's raid. Now, we're pretty casual, so it takes a bit to get everyone together. So I spent some time joking with the early arrivals in Discord. We start our raid, which these days are more like big events that sometimes have really complex scripting and coordination. Assuming we're successful in our raids, we distribute the loot. But even if I didn't get any loot from the raid, everyone gains currency from the raid that can be used for raid loot once saved up. I feel pretty good about the day. I've gotten some AAs, some progression, helped some guildmates, and even got a little loot or at least currency to save up for my own raid gear. This is just some of the many things you can do in this fairly open world. As a new or returning player, you could even choose to do some of the older progression solo, which will have some benefits for your character, such as any of the following. Heroes AA are alternate advancement ranks that are applied to your character as a reward for finishing sets of progression tasks and missions. Each gives a small boost that, when fully collected in total, has a decent stat increase to things such as armor class, attack, and hit points. Additionally, there are different achievement rewards that grant useful items for some of the past expansions content, but I'll get into the achievement system more in depth later in the review. Completing the Dragons of Norath expansion's progression may take you some time, however the content is pretty trivial today, and the permanent increases that this progression provides as a reward for its completion is definitely something worth working on while you wait for a friend to get online or other times when you aren't otherwise busy. The Moramite Proving Ground trials are easy these days, but provide a permanent resistance cap increase. Then there's the Epic 2.0 quest for your class, which will not only provide some great lore behind your class's identity, it also rewards a clicky weapon that many classes still use in their bags today due to how well their effects scale. Maybe you like trade skills. Well, trade skillers are rewarded for their hard work, with being able to complete some long quest chains that eventually grant some very powerful items, such as some Augs whose stats are insane compared to a normal Aug, or say these earrings whose stats rival all but raid drops from the current expansion. Almost every expansion, it seems like there's something yummy they add for the folks that like putting in the time to trade skill and complete these long quest chains for items which even non-raiders in most cases can obtain. So let's talk costs. EverQuest has what they call a free-to-play model. But realistically, there are so many ideas about what free to play really means or what it should mean. What I will tell you is EverQuest is free to try. If you want to at least try out EverQuest, you can do so at no cost and no meaningful impairments until you're about level 65 and gain about 250 AAs, which should give a relative feel for how the game functions. Although I must say that the game continues to give you more complexity in what you can do. You see, as you level, you get more spells or more skills. For instance, between 40 to 60, there's a big difference for a lot of classes in the spell choices they have. Likewise, however, the difference between 65 to say 85 and 85 to 105. What I mean by this is while you can try it out, you by no means will get to play fully the game for free. This is because there are limitations for free users, and eventually at a certain point in the game's progression, as noted, level 65 is my arbitrary number, you will really need to pay the subscription to play to have any real power after that threshold. Why is that? AAs are capped as a free user to an amount that's really only okay for a level 65. AAs are otherwise known as alternate advancement points, and I think it's time to explain them in this system. This is a system that was introduced in the third expansion in the game. It has been a huge focus of endgame since the system was introduced. After level 51, you can choose where your experience flows, either to increasing your levels experience or earning AA point experience. If you flip your experience over to AA points, then when the bar fills as you gain experience, you gain 1 AA point. Now, at this point in time, there are camps at the high level that reward multiple AA points per kill. Don't let that fool any of you returning players that are used to a slower AA gain in the past. The cost for the ranks of the skills and abilities have dramatically increased as well as the gain has. Now, these points are used to obtain ranks found in this window. The ranks can passively increase things like crit chance, crit damage mitigation, and so forth, or may actually provide and then further enhance new skills and abilities. There is no cap to the amount of AAs you can spend, except for when you run out of things to spend them on. And even then, there are consumable AAs called glyphs that act like consumable buffs. Additionally, you can only store AAs of an amount that's equal to 2 times your level before spending them. Ergo, a level 110 character can store up to 220 AAs before needing to spend them, or else any further experience is pretty much wasted. Here are a few examples of some of the hundreds of AA lines out there. Ashika's Blink is a forward teleport ability granted to monks through an investment of AA points. Investing more in this line increases the distance and decreases the cooldown of the ability depending on the rank. Monks also get a line called Thunderfoot, which merely is a passive ability, which gives monks a chance when using their flying kick ability, which is staple of their attack rotation to randomly cast a huge damage hit called Thunderfoot. Burst of Power is another passive line that most melee classes receive, which is why it's found under the Archetype tab. This passively grants a bunch of different effects that mainly involve granting various additional attacks to the character's auto attack. A lot of different spell casting classes receive some form of group invisibility, allowing them to buff their whole group at once, rendering them invisible, so they can pass by the majority of monsters without aggroing them. Most casting classes also receive a line of AAs called Mass Group Buff, which allows them to cast a spell on every player in a large area that would normally only hit a single targeted group of characters. Nowadays, with 23 expansions worth of AAs added to the game, most classes have over 35,000 AA points to invest in, many of which veteran players have maxed out. So how in the world would a new or returning player be expected to catch up or compete with someone that has never stopped playing EverQuest? That's a great question and a problem, but one the development team has solved over the years in a number of ways. First, specifically to AA points, there's a great system in place that assists in catching up, although it's another reason to subscribe to EverQuest. If you do subscribe to EverQuest, you can check this little button right here that enables the auto grant system. This will then provide all AAs your character is eligible for up to a certain expansion. At this time, that would be the Darkened Sea, EverQuest's 21st expansion. So as you level, you keep getting all of the available AAs from the first 21 expansions of the game. I can't explain how much time that saves. I know what you're thinking though. It sounds like they just give you all the AAs, right? So was there really to grind once you hit max level? But trust me, there's still plenty of AAs out there for you to grind. Generally, most classes will get on average 14,000 AAs from all of the auto grants, which is a great chunk of AAs and will keep you from being a burden to your friends or group mates. But there's still another some 21,000 AAs to grind out. I think it strikes a nice balance of not making a return to the game too overwhelming in terms of catching up, but still provides a lot of room to grow and progress your character. The other great systems in place is the Defiant gear that drops randomly from mobs between level 1 to 80. That really helps keep you in decent gear as you level, allowing you to focus on getting the XP you need with little worry about where the next upgrade will come from. This gear is no joke and is as good as raid gear from most levels while it drops. And lastly, while the mercenary system is not exclusively used just for new and returning players, it really helps when you get in and don't know anyone to be able to hire an NPC to tank or heal for you while you're learning the basics of the game. The mercenaries act like players in most regards, but aren't as good as real players. You know, minus the part where sometimes players will go AFK and not tell the group. Yeah, that's great. That would be about the only thing better about mercenaries. Although I do have to mention, from levels 1 through 55 or so, the tanked mercenaries are really overtuned. So getting up to that level is a breeze. But that's really a small fraction of the journey and time spent to get to endgame. Even if I was to level a tank class myself in those levels, I would choose to use a tank mercenary. But it isn't long until the tank mercenaries are almost irrelevant in their ability to take damage. In fact, if I had to guess, 85% of mercenary use is with a healer mercenary. Having a pocket healer is just so convenient sometimes. Although I'd 100% always take a real player over a mercenary. Now, I touched on the subject of buffing groups, but it is very important to note a key part of EverQuest is its buff system. Knowing which buffs do and don't stack together separates the veterans and experienced from the new folks. This is one of those systems about EverQuest that can seem overwhelming at first, but once you learn, you realize how important it is to the game, and how a lot of classes can really synergize with each other. And you start to see just how much a group mate can help you increase your character's prowess. One of the easiest examples of this in the lower to mid levels, from say 1 through 80, would be haste for melee characters. Now, haste simply increases the attack speed of melee auto attacks, but since the primary source of damage for these lower levels for melee classes comes from the damage they do with their auto attacks, increasing the speed has a profound impact on the damage dealt. Haste is such a fundamental buff for melee classes, and even classes that use pets that attack their enemies with melee attacks, that 6 of the 16 classes in EverQuest get some form of haste buff that they can cast. And there are potions and items that can provide haste to characters in the event that the better player haste spells cannot be obtained from another player. If you're a new or returning player, another important thing to note is that the developers of the game have at least tried to provide a tutorial to provide insight into many of EverQuest's game systems. And while fortunately there is some sort of reward in the form of decent starting armor for doing them, many are just long paragraphs that I believe turn off most people from reading them, which sucks because I believe if you do take the time to read them, in the long run it saves time and confusion for new players and even returning ones. Speaking of tutorials, at this point in the life of EverQuest, I would consider all levels 1 through 85 to be part of the tutorial. I mean, honestly, as you start with so little spells and skills and you blaze past levels up to 85, you start to enter the modern EverQuest experience. It's through those fast levels that you can get acquainted with your class while gaining new abilities at a rapid pace to keep things interesting. For new and returning players, I'd almost recommend soloing these levels because while they go by so fast, it will at least give you some time to fiddle with them and learn the class that you're playing before grouping with others. At 85 is when I personally would start grouping. But this doesn't mean you can't early on. In fact, let's have a real talk about low-level grouping. For that 1 through 80 range, people on Reddit, on forums, in the comments of YouTube videos, they'll provide false information time and time again, stating that there is no grouping at lower levels on live servers, and that you'll only find groups at high end. Be prepared to solo most of the way until high end, they'll say.
Finding someone to group with is ridiculously hard.
No, it's not.
And finding
No, it's
anything
not.
close to a full group of 6 people is all but impossible.
No, that's a lie. That's a lie. There's a big, bold-faced motherfucking lie. He is lying right now. In this video, we proved it not just a couple of weeks ago.
This is wrong. Flat out 100% wrong. These are statements made by people that I have to believe either have not played on a live server in years or are parroting what they've read and are just repeating it. Or they have an alternate agenda, maybe, such as spreading false information to get more people to play on whichever server or version they say has great low-level grouping. Or they did try live, but were lazy and didn't even try to get a group. Or perhaps if one gives them the benefit of the doubt, maybe they did try, but they were on one of those low populated servers I was talking about where they wouldn't likely get a group at high-end game either, just due to no players really playing on the server. I mean, seriously, I could do it. Here's the lazy way to try and find a group. Actually, I'll just type looking for group in general chat and just wait for somebody to send me a tell. Well, no one has sent me a tell or an invite. Low-level grouping is dead, right? I mean, I've been looking for a group for 20 minutes and no one has sent me a tell or an invite. Screw this game. I'm gonna go play another. Well, here's the right way to find a group on live servers. Well, at least a populated server like Front of Eye. In fact, this is a recording of a challenge that I did on my stream. I gave myself 5 minutes to get a low-level 50 group together with one of my viewers that was new to the server. So you type who all and then 4 levels under your level, then space, 4 levels over your level. Now you start sending tells to everyone on that list. And just like that, people will respond. It's really that simple. We got still 3 minutes on the clock. Sure. Song weave. Sticker deal. Fade miss. Real. 42 seconds. Leader sent an invite. We have 2. Cool. Invite me. Cool. Leader sent invite. I have an invite to a group. If you excuse me, I have some new friends to make.
Finding someone to group with is ridiculously hard.
No, it's not.
And finding
No, it's
anything
not.
close to a full group of 6 people is all but impossible.
No, that's a lie. That's a lie.
But what if you aren't a brand new player, but someone that used to play EverQuest and you're just wondering if it's worth your time to return? What is the current expansion or expansions like? Are they any good? Well, if you haven't played EverQuest for a few years, I'd say actually you're in for a treat. When you start leveling in the 100 to 110 range, the 2 previous expansions before this new one were Empires of Kunark and Ring of Scale. And as you might have guessed, they return you to the Kunark continent, where you assist the newly returned Combine Empire of Legend. Yes, this Combine Empire. Establish a foothold in Kunark. It is important to note that these expansions are considered the current time frame. So while they didn't do away with the old Kunark zones from the first expansion, Ruins of Kunark, there has been changes to the new zones that have the same names as time has progressed in these lands since we last visited Kunark in, air quotes, current content, when Ruins of Kunark was current content. If that makes sense. Here, look, for example, you start out in Lucina. Lucina Elena?
Alcyonium.
Right, what she said. Okay, so for example, you start out in
Alcyonium.
in the Empires of Kunark, which is that area that you'll find in the westmost part of the Dreadlands from Ruins of Kunark. However, it appears that over time the Yetis have now blocked off access to the rest of the Dreadlands. But fear not, because we do have a tunnel into the Burning Woods, from Ruins of Kunark time, but now it's known as the Scorched Woods in the Empires of Kunark. I really enjoyed this expansion as it brought back a lot of nostalgia from the Kunark of old, while still adding something new to the game with new stories and quests, and just simply looking at what has changed in Kunark since the Ruins of Kunark. It was really fun to observe. Now, Ring of Scale, the 24th expansion, continues this type of nostalgia, adding more Kunark zones, including the end zone of Vishen's Peak. Now, the Burning Lands is the latest EverQuest expansion to be released, having just come out in December of 2018. I find this expansion to have some of the most beautiful zones ever created in EverQuest. The story of this expansion is intriguing, taking us back to the Plains of Power as a war between the forces of fire and air is erupting. But with it came a mixed bag of reactions from the community at first. You see, the Burning Lands difficulty was not for the faint of heart on release. Some of the group missions were challenging. The mobs hit harder than ever, as one would expect from an expansion that is adding a gear progression without a level increase. And as such, those that did not already have decent gear, particularly tank classes, run into a situation where they felt like the content was insurmountable to progress for some groups, particularly boxers and soloers. Yet for me and those that I play with, I believe we unanimously enjoyed the challenge that the new expansion content brought. In fact, I stated numerous times in my stream that I felt like the Burning Lands brought real grouping back to EverQuest, where you needed a decent tank, crowd control, or a good polar that could single pull mobs. That said, on January 16th, a second round of nerfs hit the NPCs of the Burning Lands, and it significantly eased the level of difficulty for this expansion. For casual players, boxers, and returning players, soloers, this change was welcome, but I personally couldn't help but feel that something was lost with it. No doubt more revenue will be generated from this change, as a lot of boxers claimed that they weren't going to get the expansion for many of their accounts because they couldn't box in that content, which is understandable. So with the change, they likely will subscribe and get the expansion on their multiple accounts. The Burning Lands is still great, just it's easier today than it was at launch. With the Burning Lands comes also some really awesome achievement rewards when you take the time to progress in its story quests and missions. And this is where I want to talk about achievements in EverQuest. You see, since the introduction of achievements in video games, for the most part, they were simply a collection or list of things you did in a video game. Some, like on the Xbox console systems, you get points, which you can accumulate as bragging rights and compare your amount to your friends. Most MMORPGs are like that as well, such as in World of Warcraft, where players brag and compare achievement points versus one or another. Although there are a few instances, such as in World of Warcraft, that do give actual rewards, such as when you obtain the ludicrous amount of 400 mounts. You receive this bird mount thing, which is, you know, just a recolor of this bird mount thing, which was just a recolor of this bird mount thing. It's amazing to see where all that WoW money is going, huh? In EverQuest, there's a bunch of different types of rewards that you're given, along with the standard point-based system. For example, in the Burning Lands, if you complete each of the hero achievements in each of the zones for the expansion, you're given this awesome illusion item to be one of the Jan models from the expansion based on your character's class and sex. On top of that illusion, gives a buff that has so many attributes on it. It reads like a freaking drug commercial side effect list. Side effects of using Jan's Veil may include. It is simply an amazing illusion and set of buffs that come with it. It's just awesome. Some achievements merely grant you some additional alternate advancement points or special advancement points like the hero AA points I discussed earlier. Other achievements give ornamentations that can change the look of your weapons and other fun things, all for just playing the content, doing the missions and the quests. I love it, and it's a great change from the traditional achievement system that is in almost every game. It's systems like this and so many more that I couldn't possibly have time to go over that make me continue to love EverQuest. EverQuest may be 20 years old and may have a skeleton crew of developers working hard to support it these days, yet despite these challenges, the game continues to improve and innovate in ways few in the industry do. EverQuest isn't for everyone. It's for those that seek an adventure and wish to work together with friends and guildmates to accomplish goals together in this ancient and deep game that offers an experience unlike those found in other MMORPGs. For any current or returning players watching this, or perhaps any new players that have any questions or just want to see more of the game, feel free to head over to my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/nerd_navigator, where I stream EverQuest live, and come be part of our community where we can help you or at least get you in the right direction. And if you happen to subscribe to the channel, you do get these awesome emotes of my EverQuest character, you know, with fun expressions and so forth that you can share on Twitch. They were created by the GU Comics creator and artist Woody Hearn. And if you haven't stopped by GU Comics in a while, you should totally catch up on his latest comics. Anyway, thank you for taking the time to watch, and remember that Norath awaits you should you choose to accept it. Bye.